As promised in the last video in this series, I am now continuing my series on implements to level 9. At this level, you're given the ability Intensify Vulnerability, which I will explain here in a minute. Basically, Intensify Vulnerability gives a unique intensified vulnerability and a benefit from one held implement until the beginning of your next turn. It is a one action and must be applied after you have succeeded on exploiting an enemy's vulnerability. It always targets the target of your exploit vulnerability. For shortening the length on some of my slides, I always use the word target rather than saying target of exploit vulnerability to just make it a little shorter. If you've forgotten what exploit vulnerability is, it's basically the focus of the Thaumaturge class where you draw upon a random esoterica to exploit a vulnerability of an enemy, such as making them vulnerable to your attacks, and with these additional things you apply additional benefits to your action. Okay, so for the amulet, you gain a +2 status bonus to AC and saves versus any actions taken by the target. So if they attack you, your AC is 2 higher than it would be versus any other enemy. If they try to target you with a spell, you have a +2 to that save. This does not apply versus other enemies of the same type as that enemy. So if you're fighting 5 vampires and you've exploited the vulnerability of 1, you might be able to apply the damage of your exploit vulnerability against others of the same species, but you cannot apply these actions versus them. The bell allows you to impose a penalty to the save versus your ring bell ability. So essentially it's just continuing to build upon that one feature. You can look at that ability farther in my other videos in this series, but I'm not going to recount it because it's not applicable to this specific video. The chalice lets you, whenever you succeed on a strike versus the target, add additional benefits to your sip and drain actions on your chalice. So for sip, you get to apply an additional half of your level to the hit points gained by whoever sips from the chalice. So if you're level 9, which is the first level which you get this, you get to apply an additional 5 temporary hit points to the target when they sip from your chalice, after you succeed on the strike, of course. For drain, you get to add your full level. So if you're level 9, you get to add 9 hit points restored in your drain action. Remember, there's a recharge, however, so this doesn't apply on every single use of the chalice necessarily. So the lantern lets you, against the target of your exploit vulnerability, have a higher bonus to see them whenever they're attempting to do something, and makes it harder for them to lie to you or conceal themselves. They cannot become concealed with that condition. However, they can hide in other ways which are not using magic. This does make it so that the invisibility spell is significantly less useful if they cast it upon themselves, however. For the mirror, it makes you concealed to your target. Note, the target will still know where you are, thus you cannot use hide or sneak using the concealment granted by this action. However, it does provide you a bonus to AC versus enemy attacks. Regalia. The way Regalia works is it lets you pass on your bonuses versus the target to your ally by giving them a +2 circumstance bonus versus the target until the beginning of your next turn. So if you strike the target after using the enhanced vulnerability action, then your ally can gain a +2 circumstance bonus, meaning that you can just stack and stack until you can have a higher bonus. Note that this is a circumstance bonus, so it does not stack with other circumstance bonuses. Be aware of that as you're planning various methods of adding up different abilities with this one. The Tome. So the Tome essentially lets you pull off a fortune ability. The way it works is whenever you use the action, you roll 1d20, and then you get to set that dice aside. From that moment until the start of your next turn, you can use that number that you rolled instead of a new dice for a strike versus your target. This essentially lets you pick the better of 2 dice if you want. If you get a good number, you don't have to roll again. But if you got a bad number, you can reroll. So that gives you an opportunity to have a better hit. It is a fortune effect, meaning that few abilities will stop it or limit it. However, a couple abilities might cause some sort of penalty on that. The wand. The wand, it's a bit weaker than the other ones in that whenever you fling magic, it lets you deal an additional amount of damage equal to 1 plus the number of damage dice, because the wand gets additional damage dice as you level up. So this usually sums to a +2 or +3 bonus, but it could be useful if the enemy has a weakness to that damage and that you can add a little more on top of what you're already dealing. But in general, I don't think it's as interesting as the other options here. So for the weapon, this gives you a +2 status bonus to attacks versus the target. So if you exploit vulnerability, then enhance it, and then attack, you have a +2 status bonus. Note, this can stack with circumstance bonuses granted by allies. So it can allow you to get a higher bonus to your attacks, but you want to be careful that you're not overriding repeatedly on status bonuses, which are very commonly granted by spells, unlike circumstance bonuses, which are more commonly granted by various situations, such as martial support actions. I hope this was helpful in understanding how the enhanced vulnerability options work in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped you understand.